Good morning, welcome back. We are now up to the deliberations portion of the proposed livestock movement bylaw. Now, Ms. Bevan, do you want to take us through this, or where I'm thinking is on page of the deliberations report, I think about page 45, we have matters raised in submissions. Is that going to be the simplest way to take us through this in a logical order, or have you given it some other thought?
Yes, I think so. Those were the matters identified as the key matters to be discussed, and there may be some other things councillors wish to raise as well.
Right. Okay. So that is on page 46 of your agendas. At the bottom of the page, it talks about the majority of the submissions supporting the bylaw or supporting in part. These are relatively minor amendments, and the first one up for deliberation is the age of a competent person. Now, there was a definition query raised, and we will discuss that later, taking some legal advice on that. So I propose to leave that one until later. Point 2 is excessive. The word of excessive stock excrement, and also somebody raised the word excessive, and I wonder if there's some discussion on that topic, please. Councillor Smith.
I'm not sure whether you could make an objective decision on whether the excrement is excessive or not, because it's subjective as to people's interpretation. But my concern is the suggestion that the reliance on the regional council, we are the road controlling authority, so I think we need to have our provisions in the bylaw, and whether the regional council has separate ones, I don't really care. But as the road controlling authority, I think we do need to have them in place. And you know, as a farmer, and there's a few of us on board here, cattle do their business as they cross or drove, but the reality is, yeah, it's an opinion. It's perception, so it's very difficult. But anything that's pretty obvious should be removed.
It's Councillor Beck.
Yeah, I guess I concur with those comments by Councillor Smith. I'm reminded of our discussions for horses when we dealt with that. And I guess where a horse is on a sort of a shared path or a more urban environment, our tolerance as a society will be pretty low for anything being left behind in a place where people are, walking and kids are on scooters, etc. In rural environments, we do have to accept that it's, that's part of what makes it rural, and that there's I guess a greater tolerance that we should sensibly exercise, but perhaps just to leave it as excessive, begs a definition, a bit like competence. It sort of begs probably slightly more clarification. Otherwise, it's completely in the eye of the beholder whether it's we'll get a vexatious number of complaints or whether a farmer deliberately ignores. I mean, it's just a bit fraught, I suppose. So I think a greater definition, which I think is what Councillor Smith was referring to, is appropriate.
You are saying including the word excessive or excluding?
We can include it, but with we need an asterisk and a further definition, I think, further wording definition.
Yeah, and yes. Mayor Allen.
Yeah, look, I don't know how you create a definition around excessive. Okay, so first point for me, when there's been excrement dropped on the road, it's council issue unless it goes directly into a waterway. So it is very much a TLA issue at that point. As Councillor Smith said, it is subjective when it comes to, I might walk down and say, oh, Christ, there's only a couple cows have done their job over there. I wouldn't call that excessive, and then somebody else turns up who's not within the area and says, well, that is excessive to them. So it is a subjective thing, but it's not actually only about excrement. I've got to say that I've been in recent times travelling down Western Bays Road, and there's quite a number of stock gets driven down Western Bays Road. It's not the excrement that actually gets you, it's actually the cattle coming in and off out of the water tables and actually dragging dirt onto the road. More of an issue, and I do see that with some of our crossings too. But I think clear issue here, it's not a regional council issue unless it's discharging directly into waterway. It's definitely a BLA issue. But once again, I don't quite know how you give it a definition or a number to excessive. So yeah, best guess there.
Councillor Maguire.
Yeah, farmers don't like other farmers putting that on the road, and you've got a lot of lifestyle people around this area in particular. Well, most of the Waikato District Council, but yeah, I still believe the mat is an ideal exercise, and I see you want to get rid of that. And there's one bloke that uses one, and it makes a huge difference and keeps the road pretty clean. So I still think the mat is something that we should be using, and he uses that. He crosses pretty regularly, and he uses it all the time, and there's very little left behind. So, but no, as long as I've been involved with District Council, I've had to deal with stock crossings, and farmers don't like their counterparts putting stuff on the road, as I said. And the lifestyles don't like it. So I think the less we can put on, the better. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Church.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I think it's important to try and clarify it. What the word that actually comes to mind, which is in law and in a lot of case law, is reasonable. And I think it was Mayor Allen that was talking about, well, what around, you know, if it was in a more urban area or is in a rural area, there's a reasonableness of that business or that activity. Now, reasonable is very well clarified within, you know, and I think that might be a better word to use. And I think we actually in other bylaws also use the word more reasonable rather than excessive.
So what would be your thoughts then on the first line? The bylaw requires excessive stock excrement to be removed. Are you saying
it'd be like unreasonable, wouldn't it?
Unreasonable amounts?
Because as we've talked about, if it's in the middle of a no exit rural road, as an example, and there's mats down in a couple, you know, that's that where there might be some more sensitivities, but there's actually a rural business going on in that area too, and we must be cognizant of those rural activities where someone's unreasonably not putting down mats, or it's consistently lots and lots of ongoing. But I just see the word reasonable or unreasonable as more easily understood under law.
Thank you.
But it's still subjective, I agree.
Councillor Beck?
Yeah, sorry, my coffee just kicked in. If we're struggling with finding the right words, is it possible within a bylaw to use pictures? Could we actually have a couple of photos that illustrate what we deem to be reasonable and what we deem to be unreasonable, and then not seek to define that in words? Because every situation will be different, but it just gives a little bit of examples, I suppose, examples of what might be reasonable and what might be not.
I don't know the answer to that. Ms. Bevan, do you have any thoughts on that, or is it something we need to leave for later?
Yeah, I would probably ask for Kirsty's advice on the use of pictures and bylaws.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Wallerton.
I know I used to cross a Lake Road years ago, and one of the directives that came from regional council, we had to hold our cows back 100 metres from the road, so that by the time they got to the crossing, because it's when they're waiting is actually when they get a lot of muck on their feet and everything, so they're then able to walk a lot of that off to make the road clearer. So that, I believe, is actually in regional council's guidance on crossing roads. And also the other problem is people wash the roads, which then the water and everything goes in, as you got holding ponds and all sorts of things. brings another problem again. I think that's then becomes under regional. So getting to the point of excess on the road, again, it's if you're doing best practice, it's usually not too bad. And sometimes a cow might do a paddy, and then actually the rest of the cows walk through it and smear it across the road. And so it's that's where the problem's occurring. I'm not sure. Again, interpretation is anywhere. Probably haven't answered any questions, but point of view.
Thank you, Councillor Wallerton. So what we've got here is two parts to this. One being the staff proposal that the rule is retained, which aligns, as Councillor Beck says, with other bylaws. And it also is not relying on regional enforcement actions and plans and cutting the district council out. The second point is, which does need clarification later on in this, is the word excessive and how that is more accurately defined. So, Mayor Allen.
Yeah, look, to Councillor Beck's point around pitches, possibly we could use them as definitions. There's no harm in that. I don't think there is in actually giving a definition of it. Look, I tell you, as a farmer and somebody who does lease land to a farmer who has a crossing, they hate it. They absolutely hate it. So they don't enjoy doing this. I'll tell you that right now. And because it's one of the most stressful things they have to actually deal with. And that's what drove a lot of people to crossings, because it just became too damn stressful. I think, and Councillor Maguire referred to us getting rid of mats. Well, I didn't think we were getting rid of mats, because if we get rid of mats, you really are going back into dark ages, because mats, they are good for a number of reasons, but they don't necessarily stop all of it from getting in right. Councillor Wilton's right. Unfortunately, where cows congregate is where the crap, whether it be mud or cow dung, gets taken onto the mat, and unfortunately there's a bit of spillage on the side, which most of us accept as that's just a byproduct of the crossing sort of thing. So I think perhaps putting some examples there of our definition of what it may or may not look like for a good example, bad example, and I think you just need to, because otherwise it's subjective. It's always subjective. It doesn't matter what wording you use, it'll always be subjective.
And that's my concern on that. Mr. McCulloch, do you have some illumination for us?
I think that's probably a bit generous, but good morning, good morning all. No, I was just trying to get back to the basics of what's the purpose of excessive stock excrement or moving it. And I don't think you'll ever get a definition of excessive. If I'm right, it's all around safety for road users. And so it appears that why wouldn't we actually say something like, shall remove stock excrement from roads where it poses a safety hazard or a hazard to road users? Just actually let's call out what the issue is we're trying to manage. As PCBUs, farmers know all about risk. They know all about health and safety obligations. They will use their judgment as to whether they believe the amount of excrement on the road is going to cause an issue, whether it's environmental, whether it's a hazard to a road user. So I just wonder if we frame it up that way.
Yeah, that sounds like it has merit to me. Are there any comments on that point specifically before I go to Councillor Maguire? Councillor Gibb?
Yes, I agree with Mr. McCulloch, but also we've had complaints, and I'm a farmer's wife, so I'm not the one complaining, but we've had complaints about cars getting dirty driving through the excrement. So, and we all know we've had those complaints. I don't know that solution will do away with those people complaining, but I agree in the main that Mr. McCulloch's got a good point.
Thank you. Councillor Patterson, is this on the same point?
Yes. Yes, it is. Sorry. So, we could go around for a long time on this with the word excessive. Do we just take out that word excessive?
Yeah.
And just use common sense. I know it's a word that doesn't get used much these days, but oh, you know, if there's a bit of crap on the road, so be it. But let's just keep things where it's workable for everybody. So.
Valid point. Councillor Maguire.
Just going back to mats, the concern was over the last few years that cars have been racing over the mats and getting tied up in them and causing problems. So staff in the past, they're no longer with us, haven't required farmers to use them. So that's where I come from on that one.
Thank you very much. Councillor Smith.
Yeah, on the point of the word excessive, it's not defined in the bylaw. So the common practice in law is to go to the dictionary meaning and the plain and ordinary use. And in the Oxford Dictionary, excessive is defined as too much or too great. I'll be simply saying that if there's too much on the road or too. So what are we actually trying to say? And again, if we go to Roger, and I don't normally disagree with Roger, but if we're putting the onus about what's safe or what's not, again, people's interpretation, it's subjective. So we're not really solving anything. A good suggestion, however, Roger, but it doesn't solve the issue. I think everyone accepts that if there's too much on the road, it should be cleaned off. And maybe, but again, what is too much? So Axel's idea, I think was Axel's about pictures. I'm not sure that needs to be part of the bylaw itself, but an explanatory note with the bylaw, giving examples of what's considered. Therefore, it would give guidance to the permit holders and also to staff who are interpreting and applying it.
I wonder whether using the Occam's razor principle, whether just we simply remove the word excessive and work from there. I think that seems, otherwise we sound like we're tangling ourselves up in knots. I do appreciate the point made by Mr. McCulloch. I think it's very sensible, but the simpler the better. And what we're saying is if there's excrement on the road, remove it.
But therein lies a problem, Madam Chair, if I can, some excrement, quite frankly, is of no consequence. And therefore, by removing the word excessive, you then put, I believe, a more onerous responsibility on farmers to remove every piece of excrement, which is not necessary, in my view. And I say that as a farmer, but I also say as a road user, in rural areas, that, so I think the more we speak about this, the messier we're actually making it. Thank you.
Hence, that's why I'm saying go for the simplicity. Councillor Church.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I will go back to the word. I think excessive is quite an extreme word. And again, taking what Councillor Smith says about definitions, that's why reasonable or unreasonable is really around having sound judgment and fair and sensible. And I think it's more appropriate to it's fair and moderate. What we're saying is there's more than one user group, and they're often, with reverse sensitivities, potentially in conflict with each other in some situations, as Councillor Gibbs said, where councils, just in my opinion, should be reasonable about assessing a complaint. It's only when it's a complaint. When we're saying excessive, to me, it pictures that it could be quite a lot of excrement on the road before we would actually do anything about it, where it might be upsetting quite a few people around a town. So that's why I think if you're going to have any word in there, it's more around the reasonableness or fair to the situation and to the activity and where it is and the amount. Excessive, I think, is too big a word. So if you're going to take it out, I'm on that page, but I do think it's unfair to the rural businesses to take it out completely, because it's not reasonable to not have a certain amount of excrement or pee on the road at sometimes, even with mats and even with the best intentions. It's not a reasonable act. It's not possible. It's not perfect. But to have a moderate and reasonable assessment of that implication of where it is and the extent of it is a better place to land.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, we are quite rightly going round in circles here. When there's any dispute around definition of a word, and legislative document, then one goes to the purpose of that legislation. And I think Roger's quite right. The intent is about safety here. So I wouldn't want to see the excessive removed, because or even reasonable, I think you're saying we're going to get caught in the same trap. Who defines reasonable? So I do think what Councillor Smith is saying, to remove excessive will put the onus of all excrement being removed by that landowner, which is unreasonable. But I just also support what Councillor Beck's saying. Let's just provide some pictorial evidence about what we believe is excessive. That just goes to providing more of a definition and keep it outside the realms of being subjective.
Mr. Bayer, on that same topic.
Heading, what was that?
Mr. Bayer.
Yeah, so generally it's been either myself or my staff that have been involved in these discussions with landowners about cleaning the roads. And I'm not sure that we even need a picture or even necessarily some guidance, because when you turn up there, it either needs to be cleaned or it doesn't, and that's generally fairly obvious. So, I mean, I would be happy with the word to remove excrement, or even, you know, excess to stay there, because ultimately staff end up being quite practical. You're never going to, you know, have a discussion with a farmer and try and ask him to do something that's unreasonable. So there's always this kind of reasonableness factor involved in these discussions. So, you know, I wouldn't get too bogged down about the wording and what's there. Removal is definitely required in some circumstances, and so we just need to have a clause in there somehow that says, you know, we can ask you to remove excrement from the road. Don't know whether that helps, but
it does help. Thank you, Mr. Bayer. Mayor Allen.
Yeah, look, I don't like the word reasonable, because it's just as subjective. So I actually totally agree with Councillor Ayres said, actually. And actually, in fact, I think Ross just sort of actually answered it. If you turned up and applied a reasonable approach to something like that, if it's an excessive, you remove it. End of story. So I think staff do need something, Ross, in relation to excessive. You don't see, well, I certainly haven't seen excessive crap on the road for a long time. And I think it probably came out of this original bylaw and what we set out to tidy up many years ago. And I think most of it has been pretty well tidied up. So we're only dealing with the odd one-off case or fringe cases these days. But I look, at the end of the day, you need to move on, Madam Chair. So I would suggest we just leave it as it is, excessive, and let staff apply it in a practical sense, and just leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully the last word on this topic, Councillor Patterson.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, maybe we could just put in wording which then sort of covers off Roger's comments before, where that, and you can still leave the word excessive in there, is that excessive stock excrement to be removed when stock excrement becomes unsafe to road users, something like that.
Or possibly even just some referral to risk to users. So we'll leave that to Ms. Bevan and Ms. Ridling to have a look at. Councillor Gibb, is this still on the same topic? Yeah.
Yes, Madam Chair. I just wonder if the word nuisance might be helpful in there somewhere. Becomes a nuisance to road users.
The more you play with it, the more difficult it becomes.
I think the issue that we're grappling with is that every word that we propose to describe how much is too much is an entirely subjective word. I think what we've heard from staff is that they apply a reasonable measure when they're looking at it.
Has anybody been prosecuted for this situation in the last 10 years, Mr. Bayer? Through you, Madam Chair.
my knowledge doesn't go back 10 years, but certainly there's been no talk of prosecution in the 3 years that I've been involved in it. It's generally been just repeat discussions with the farmer about doing better, basically. So that's generally how the conversation goes.
Thank you.
Look, I suggest we leave that as it is. Move on. If anybody's got a burning desire to revisit this at the end, then we should do so. The next one is the maximum distance for driving stocks down the road. And this was where we had the 400 metres. Mayor Allen.
Hang on, in relation to the 400 metres, yeah, look, I'm not, I think Councillor Smith summed that up this morning. Gateways are not always opposite one another, but when you start moving stock, this has been a problem for us, and I'm not going to name on public forum the problem we've actually had with this particular one. But at the end of the day, you know, if a gateway is what we call offset, meaning it's 50 metres or 60 or 70 metres either side of it, I don't have a particular issue with that. Those that actually are a long way away, there is an issue. But I think one of the issues that was raised under this was with Graham McBride actually raised an interesting point here on assessment of these and in proximity to distance and location of gates and gateways. And I was thinking about it, why aren't these assessed for safety around the same principles that are applied when you ask for a new gateway entrance to a generally it's to a farm in relation to where it needs to be positioned around sightlines.
So under item 9 on the next page.
Oh well, I'm dealing with it now. I'm not going backwards. So at the end of the day, well, it actually covers off this as well, Noel. So it's both. So you know, they should be assessed under that same principle and not on a different approach just because you're moving stock versus putting in a new gateway entrances. That's all that one. But that distance and down the road, look, this has been an issue for a long time for this council. As I said, we've got one opponent, and I just happened to drive past his property in January actually, because I got deterred because of an accident, and it surprises me it's still going on. Because as a farmer myself and as a neighbour of somebody that did that for many years past my front door, it's not a nice thing to happen. And that's what was happening in that particular case until he brought the neighbour out who lived on a lifestyle block. So there is some real issues around people being able to travel too far down the road before it's not a crossing. So I think the crossing thing needs to be reasonably tight.
Can I also point out that there's sight lines, lines of sight, which is SIGHT. If we can go through and do a find and replace throughout this, it's line of sight, not a location of sight. SITE. Councillor Smith, do you have a
thank you, Madam Chair.
Comment on this one, please?
Yes, so I'm dealing with the 400 metres moving. I addressed that earlier this morning and asked the questions of Federated Farmers and Mr. Cameron. I didn't need to for Ms. Clark because she was part of the Federated Farmers response, as well as Ms. Costa, who did it. So I think we've got the issue with the moving, that the 400 metres is unreasonable and should be removed, and that's what staff have put into the track change version. And the stop crossing, which I'm not sure, I haven't looked ahead, but when that comes up, that we actually strengthen, because at the moment we've only got the 100 metre reference in the definition of stock permit crossing.
And not in the bylaw.
And not in the bylaw itself, which you will have heard that they all agreed should be in there and supported. So if we can make those appropriate changes, I don't really think there's any contrary view, and is well supported.
Yeah, I believe so. So moving to signage, there was quite a bit of discussion on that. And I think, again, what we're looking to do is what is reasonable. I'm interested in other people's thoughts on this. And to be honest, if I'm running a business, I would want to go for, I'd probably be quite happy to buy my own signs and make sure they complied and put them up at a cheaper cost. Mayor Allen.
This one's pretty simple. All it has to do is comply with the standard. And Ross will know what they can tell you what that standard is. If they can buy exactly the same signs or similar to what we actually have that are that actually comply with safety within the road corridor, let them buy their own signs. I don't have an issue with it. If they can get them $10 cheaper than what we can pass them on to them for, I don't have a problem with that either. But they must be compliant. It's not, as I think Councillor Beck might have said in an earlier discussion, them hand painting signs, because these signs are reflective signs, and hand painting signs are not reflective signs. So we just need to make sure there's a standard here.
So what we're saying, pardon me, what we're saying in here is offering an option that they may choose to purchase their own signs and install them.
Yeah, look, when it comes to installing, that's different again. So I think the installing of the sign should be signed off by staff in relation to a safe distance, because everybody has a different interpretation and different driver to that. So the sign, if they can go and buy the same size as signs that we're providing, yeah, and get it cheaper, let them go for it, knock your socks off.
Yeah.
But when it comes to placement of it, I would suggest there is some clear defined rules around where they should be placed in proximity.
Sure. Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Thank you. The Mayor and I are 100% aligned on this. I have no problem with a person erecting and placing signs in accordance with the criteria set out and no doubt a rule somewhere, and paying for them. I think during the inspection for the permit, that a discussion should take place with the permit holder, and if they intend to erect them, agree with the staff member the location of the signs, X marks the spot, and that's where they can put, and therefore if there's any maintenance to be done, they are also responsible, they can take responsibility for that, so long as it's in the same place and configuration, etc. No problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wallerton.
Yeah, I'm in support of that as well. I think that makes sensible solution. And the other thing we'll need is a time frame, because the last thing we want is someone to say, oh yeah, I'll do it, and they don't do it. So if it's not done within an agreed time from the permit being issued, or when the permit comes into force, that council will then step in and put the sign in no matter what. So that would be something else. And maybe we might need a site inspection on to know where all these things are going to work.
Mm-hmm. Councillor Church.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I think it's where everyone's on the same page. The word approved comes to mind for me around the signage, to be really clear, because also I think it's good if anybody, if farmers can find it at a cheaper price and it's an approved signage, and absolutely they should be able to save money. It does. I'm a bit wary of having had examples where people decide they want to put up speed signs where they feel themselves in their own suburbs, for example. So I think we have to be a little bit wary of making sure that we are really clear and we're not setting precedents that people can go out and buy willy-nilly any sign they like and then pop it up where they like. So approved signage, a plan, and then that discussion, as you say, I agree with the permit and also the placement. And I do recall when Bruce Cameron sort of said that, the council suggested one place for his signs, but he went back and suggested another place. That I think is a really robust process where the farmer and the road safety can assess it together, have those discussions, and then come to the right place. And also, even in the rural areas, there may be other underground infrastructure we need to be very aware of. So I would be hesitant to just go carte blanche to leaving it just to the farmers to put their own signs up anywhere without making sure that there is a checking of for any other underground infrastructure or issues.
And that's where I think Mr. Bayer covered that off. So good point. Councillor Eyre.
Oh yes, just thank you. Just following on from that, also the farmer has local knowledge about where your high wind is as well. I've seen plenty of signs out there being knocked over where you have a really strong prevailing westerly wind. So I think probably that placement of the signs in consultation with the farmer is a really good idea. But just bringing up the issue, and I don't know whether you want to discuss it now, Madam Chair, and at a later point, the matter that I raised about it not being explicit enough for me in the bylaw about removal of temporary signage. I see it as a real issue in this ward, without a doubt. There are some farmers that are leaving those temporary signs out. Is there any way we can actually just state the obvious, so be it, in the bylaw to say that the temporary signs must be removed when not in use? I know it was also about education, but then sometimes it's not just about education. Sometimes it could possibly be for other reasons those signs are left up.
What you're saying is very clear. I'm not sure that that's something that we consulted on. I can't remember temporary signage in the bylaw itself. Can perhaps somebody help me with that?
The road controlling authority can remove those signs if they wanted to.
Clearly you want, sorry, Ms. Bevan, thank you.
Yeah, so the bylaw does have rules around signage, mainly within the permit conditions rather than the bylaw itself. So it requires temporary signage must be used when stock are crossing. All signage must be approved by council. Council will arrange for the signs to be installed on behalf of the permit holder and notes that a subsidy is available for approved signage. We don't have any specific requirements around removing temporary signage. Yes, I'll finish there.
That goes to my point, because it has created hazard. I'm well aware of occasions out here where the non-removal of temporary signage is causing issues. So you speak in the permit and in the bylaw about the use of signage when those stock are being moved, but I still think we need to be really explicit in saying that signage needs to be removed when stock are moving, if we stock aren't moving.
Madam Chair, we've had no submissions on this point, so I'm loath to actually introduce.
Yeah, I'm just racking my brains and I can't remember anything on this, and I don't think we can go there actually, and I think we will just again raise that with Ms. Ridling, but my feeling on that is it's wasn't raised. Ms. Bevan, are you still with a hand up there or your hand down? Okay. Okay, so I think we landed on that fairly clearly, that there is an option for farmers to buy their own approved signs that comply with all the regulations, that they can install them in conjunction with council approval of the positioning of the signs. Permit timeframes, we had submissions on whether the timeframe should be asking for 5 years, and I'm just opening that up for discussion. The staff propose there is no change to the permit timeframes. Councillor Maguire.
I wonder whether we could go to 10 years on the underpasses, because that sort of creates no hazard to the road, and they go 20 metres right across, so there's no impact on cars driving off the road into them like there was initially. So yeah, quite happy with 5 years with cows walking across the road, but the underpasses could go 10 years because they are inspected every so often, and they should last 50 or 100 years by rights. So, but anyway, that's where I'm coming from on that one.
Thank you, Councillor Smith.
Yeah, I support that they are 1 to 5 years, or in fact 0 to 5 years in reality. But 1 to 5 years, with a general expectation that they be for 5 years unless there's good reason not to. Would be my view of how it would run, and yeah, it would save council time and commitment in inspecting, and also the farm owner has been articulated by the submitters. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor Allen.
Yeah, a couple of points. First one's back to what Councillor McGuire just said. My understanding is, and somebody please correct me if I'm right, you don't need a permit to run cows through a underpass. Yeah, I thought so. All right, so back to the question. Look, I don't have a problem anywhere between 0 and 5 years. Just realising that not everybody, and sort of what came through this morning with some of the submitters, they wanted 5 years. Not everybody wants a permit for 5 years. I know some that only want it for 2 or 3 years because they're leasing land and that's all their lease is. So they just want it for that period. So the flexibility is there anywhere between 0 and up to 5. That's what it should be.
And I noticed the point was made on wanting some assurance of that ability for 5 years. So I do think that it has been covered off here. Councillor Church.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to briefly go back to Councillor Ayres' point. Yeah, on page 64, number 3, it actually says the correct use and maintenance of those temporary signs. But I think it's a valid point of making sure that, you know, because temporary, they have more impact. We've discussed that, and even the submitters impact. But I segueing that also into, because it came up with submissions as well around education, and maybe there's a leaflet or on our website when we put down, hey, this bylaw, and here's some more information that may be helpful and support rural businesses with these crossings. And that education, that we actually probably highlight the use of those temporary signs would be an advantage and an opportunity to engage better with the users of those signs.
Thank you. Thank you. So moving on to the, we had no submissions, I don't believe, on subsidies for stock underpasses.
Yes, we did.
Did we?
Was that not Rosemary Costa? One of them touched on the subsidies. Less than 500 vehicles per day, and that yeah, her point 3 was on that issue.
Oh, right.
And they shouldn't, less than 500, they should not have to underpass, and etc. So there was some discussion on it. Again, it was one person.
So here, the proposal is that no changes required. It's spelled out fairly explicitly. Councillor Wallerton.
I think there's a written submission as well, and my understanding was we are just passing the NZTA subsidy along anyway, so it's not a council subsidy.
Okay.
So therefore, we're just using the rules that are already in place.
Okay. So if there's no more discussion on that, the fees and charges was raised in submission, but these are issues for the long-term plan. Councillor Church, is your hand still up?
No, no. Just around that underpass was on page 19 also, around the underpass, that suggestion that anyone who is reforced, it says anyone, a farmer forced by council to put in an underpass, whatever the road count, should be eligible for a minimum of 25% subsidy. So in my opinion, we actually had quite a few submissions around that underpass and the subsidy. That was on Bruce Cameron's one, as an example.
Councillor Smith.
Well, Councillor Walden hit the nail on the head, and this has come up over the 14.5 years I've been here. There is an NZTA subsidy which council chooses not to embellish, and so therefore we pass on what is in the NZTA provisions. Unless we change that through the LTP, we can't offer what they're asking.
Thank you. Mayor Allen?
Yeah, further to that, and from my long years of learnings, that actually needs to refer to the subsidy derived from Waka Kotahi, because if it doesn't, it just means that council will be responsible, whether it's available through Waka Kotahi or not, for that 25%. So it should reference back to the 25% subsidy as per availability with Whakakatahi.
Good point.
That should actually tidy it up. It shouldn't be just, that's very, very open-ended, that statement there. It means that we'll end up paying for it. The other thing is, you've got to be very careful here, because if I go back probably a decade or so ago, we had some underpasses that actually came in well in excess of $200,000 each. Yeah. And all of a sudden, some of those people were coming back and screaming, well, you said 25%, but we averaged them on a pumped underpass being, I think back then was about 140 to 160,000 versus to an unpumped one, which was actually less than that. But we had some come in well over $200,000, which were pumped ones. And all of a sudden, we were looking a bit red-faced about it. So it needs to be tied to a subsidy, or otherwise we need to top that up. So just be aware of that trap.
Yep. Okay. All right, I think Ms. Bevan's got that one. The conditions for livestock movement permits and the specification of the routes. There was quite a bit of discussion on that. The staff propose that permits continue to require the identification of the routes, but I do take the point that there may be flooding or erosion or risk or whatever that may change. So I'm interested in what the comments are on that. Councillor Gibb.
I have a question about whether no exit roads were considered, and I may have missed it, but there have been a couple of submitters saying they have a no exit road and they feel that that should be another category because there's a lot less movement, traffic movements. Just I'd like somebody to comment, Mr. Bayer maybe.
Mr. Bayer, do you have any thoughts on that?
Apologies, I was just reading an email from Councillor Willerton. So can you just pose the question again, please, Jenna?
Yes, sure. Just I noticed a submitter was talking about their road, although it's a rural sealed road, it's a no exit road and there's a lot less traffic movements per day, and I don't see any allowance anywhere unless you can point that out to me for an assessment separate to the the grid that you've got.
Each application will be treated on its merits. So yeah, well, so that'll be dependent on traffic volume and how often they cross the road. So it must fall in that matrix somewhere, but without looking at an individual road, I mean, I couldn't make a comment probably.
I mean, I can tell you the road, but it's submitter on page 76, I think it was. It was Salzburgers on Howard Road. The expressway cut that road off, so it's a no exit road, it's a sealed road, and they were just saying in their submission that could there be an allowance for no exit roads. It's sealed. It falls under the 200 vehicle movements per day, and they're saying that look, there's less than 50 or around 50 if you're lucky, and they just asked if there could be another category. So I just wondered, and I may have missed it in all the discussions and reading, if there'd been thought given to that.
The answer is no thought has been given to that, but each road would be looked at on its merits, and a decision made as to whether they were required to have a crossing permit, even within that matrix.
Thank you. That's quite clear, Mayor Allen. Sorry, what are you wanting to comment on? Because we had moved on from.
God, I forgot what I was going to comment on. Listening to Councillor Gibb then.
I know. Should be fair. She raised a very good.
No, look, just on that point, Councillor Gibb, because I dealt with that when the Rogers were at the far end of the road there. So look, I think Ross nailed it. It's basically on the merits on a case by case basis, sort of thing. Yeah, look, when it comes to fees, yeah, look, all I would,
sorry.
what's that?
We'd moved on from the fees because they're an LTP issue.
Oh, yeah, but I was just going to raise, they may be an LTP, but they are part of the bylaw too. I just want to make it clear that every time you remove a fee, you move the burden of cost to other people who've got nothing to do with that side of the business. The same as you would look at a food, we have issues from the food producers being butchers and cafes around complaining about health inspectors and the cost of that. So this is actually no different. So I'd leave it at that. So what were we rattling on about?
We no rabbits in this livestock. We were talking about the need to specify the routes that.
Oh yes, that's right. Yeah. Okay. So look, you can't just have an arbitrary change it. People don't move stock on roads when roads are flooded. Plain and simple. And our roads are only ever flooded for maybe a few hours at best. So if you allow people to arbitrarily just change their mind to move it because there's an adverse weather effect, well, quite honestly, I think it'd be very wrong of anybody to move stock in an adverse weather effect anyway. So, no, I think the route needs to be identified, and it's not only to protect the farmer or the person moving the stock, it's to protect everybody, that we actually know that's going on.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just going back to the matter, and I apologise for jumping about a bit. I was late in putting my hand up. In respect of the subsidies and underpasses, I understand that the process where that is set, and I think it for applicants for it to be made clear in the bylaw, that would be really great. But the submitter has raised the issue about the need to have the underpass with roads that are under a certain usage limit, the 500 vehicles per day. What did the subcommittee, we haven't had discussion about that.
Do you want me to speak to that, Madam Chair?
Thank you.
That wasn't a scenario that was put to the subcommittee, but I think what I heard from Mr. Bayer is that it will be assessed on a case-by-case basis. Read common sense, I would say. And I think we should leave it at that.
Okay.
It's not issues that don't exist. If they do in this one case out of all the hundreds of farms we've got, let staff make a practical, pragmatic decision, please.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Councillor Waterton, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, sometimes you've got to be aware that if a guy's crossing at the beginning of a no-ent road and there's 10 or 15 people down there and they're driving through someone's muck and he's not cleaning it properly, well, that's not right either, just because there's only 10 cows. Sorry, 10 people. So they've got a right to a clean road too. So you just sort of got to, just because it's not busy, doesn't mean they don't have to play by the rules.
Madam Chair, can I address the issue at hand in relation to the, in my view, I support the Mayor's view that we should know where people wish to move stock along our roads. But the reality is, should we have a civil emergency, whether it's a cyclone or it's a flood or whatever, and fences are down or stock in such a position where they need to be moved, I would say just get on and move them and worry about their consequences later, because it would be wrong to leave stock and die. And so people will take care, and not that many people should be out and about at that time anyway. So I think common sense prevails, and I think we can make a lot of scenarios. What if this and what if that? Let's just deal with the practicalities, and emergency situations just get dealt with.
Agree.
It's probably a slightly different context in which I was speaking to it. And common sense would apply in that case, yes, and you do move the stock to safety. But I think they applied it in principle around the fact that if they were driving from A to B, but part of B was flooded, they'd go around C. That's what the context they presented it in.
Right. Ms. Bevan.
Yes, I just wanted to note that the bylaw does allow for the movement of stock in an emergency situation already. So that is permitted.
That's nicely covered off. Thank you. And I think that brings us quite well to the site with a GHT distance requirements. So the bylaw does require site distances. and is proposing that the site distances are appropriate. Councillor Smith.
Sorry, I've left my hand up, which I didn't intend to speak to, but the reality is, I think once again, there should be some latitude for Mr. Bayer and his team to look at what's pragmatic. In Mr. McBride's case, would that be grandparented to what exists now and has done for many years, or is he made to change? So I think the ability to be pragmatic should remain with the staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gibb.
Oh, just to clear up my no exit comment, I've been pointed to clause 8.4a, which does mean that there's an individual assessment. So Mr. Bayer is correct, and it does talk about crossing points and blind ends of roads and things. So I think that yes, there's an ability for staff to assess individual people in conjunction with talking to the owners. So that's quite good to know. Thank you.
This is like herding cats.
Thank you, Councillor Church.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, at the end of the day, the policy objectives are around, a lot of them, and even our submitters, I think our ex-councillor Rosemary Costa was one of them, was actually to make sure that we eliminate any unsafe stock crossings in the area, and really for road users and all road users, including all farming people, and just have that safety. So we just made to make sure that when we put the numbers in, that the assessment's done, because there is going to be ad hoc times when the road safety assessment may not quite fit within the criteria, and I think that's a delegation that to Roger's team to assess that in each individual situation is very important for the health and safety of all users, and also the practicality for those rural businesses.
Thank you. Good point. So that brings us to the end of the matters raised in submission. I don't believe I've missed any, Ms. Bevan. That's the totality? I do note that there are some questions that require Ms. Ridling to make some comment under legal privilege. So on that basis, could I have a mover to move into public excluded, please, while we receive that advice? Thank you, Councillor Lynch and Councillor Thompson seconding.